Hello, and welcome to the first in a series of videos exploring the intricacies of the International Baccalaureate programs, also known as the IB. I am your host, Michael Thorstensen. I am the IB Middle Years and Diploma Coordinator at Basic Academy of International Studies, located in Henderson, Nevada, in the United States. Let's start at the very beginning. In the late 60s, international businessmen and women and ambassadors working for the United Nations and a number of other positions within that organization realized that internationally and even within nations, something we've come to realize much more obviously in recent years is the quality of education that you get is a function of your location. And so the posting that these people had in particular countries, in particular parts of particular countries, drastically altered the impact and the effectiveness of the education that their families receive, particularly their children, their school-age children, which impacted their ability to effectively navigate or even apply to the university systems in Europe and in the United States. And so they recognized the need for an international system of education, something that would be internationally recognized. And if it's going to be internationally recognized, it needs to meet the highest rather than the moderate standards. And so they looked around and didn't invent anything. They literally copy and pasted. They built from what worked. They picked and choose amongst what systems in the world, some of the most effective educational systems in the world were doing, and looked at the philosophy and the learning theories and the research on why that was the case. And then they built a system to support that. And that began as an 11th and 12th grade, as I said, 11th and 12th grade initiative that was focused on college preparatory success. And so it was about creating students that were prepared for success at university, that were highly competitive in the admissions process, and ideally some scholarships would ensue as well. And so what they looked at in that sense was high rigor, lots of learning, in-depth, those major elements. In many ways, the diploma program in its early days piggybacked what advanced placement was doing in the United States. In fact, at one point when they just opened AP and rented space to the IB in their New York office as they were trying to get a leg up to get started. And so that really is where it began. And so they realized, however, as they were progressing and as this was evolving, that number one, that was a bit elitist. It tended to alienate people. When we talk about, and there's often a comparison between AP and IB about which one's like better, which one, which one's going to get me the most, and that's an interesting and it's a challenging conversation because we're often not talking about what we think we're talking about. In the sense of like there's some magic bullet. IB is not a magic bullet. It is a system to organize information, to organize purposeful teaching and learning, to maximize outcomes. And that's it. And so it works really, really well for some students. I happen to believe it works really, really well for a greater number of students than a lot of other systems. But it's not a one-size-fits-all model. It doesn't work. Like that doesn't work. We know that doesn't work. But they also realized that by 11th and 12th grade, depending on where the kids were coming from and what their previous experiences had been, that they might be a little bit unprepared for that level of work, for that level of critical thinking, for that level of action by that age. And so in the 90s, they developed something that they called the Middle Years Program. Not a great name. But the middle years program fills that gap from grade 10 down to grade 6, right there in the middle. And they also back-built it to include K through 5, which they call the primary years program. Now, at the heart of the primary years program, we'll go all the way back to the beginning there. At the heart of the primary years program, it's about really developing the student as a student, getting them to engage with learning, keeping them interested, getting them excited about knowledge, getting them passionate about self-betterment. And so there's a lot of hands-on activities. There's a lot of inquiry-based instruction. So we ask a question, then we turn them loose, and they go explore. Think science fairs, but in all subjects, and that can be a little hard to wrap our heads around. But that's really what it's about. It's a system of addressing those children at that age group, and maximizing their learning capacity at that point, and trying to get them pointed towards their own investment in education. And then in the middle years, we shift the focus a little bit. Like I said, IB has a tendency to seem like an elitist system. The middle years program doesn't really push that rigor the diploma program encourages, and would have thought that would have been necessary. It really focuses on the best teaching practices. So I often get asked, if like, okay, so if I walk into an IB classroom, how's it going to look different than a regular classroom? And I think that's an interesting question. I think it's a hard question, because the answer is it shouldn't look different than a regular classroom. But the sad point of fact is a lot of regular classrooms are not exceptional. There's not a lot of learning happening. National statistics, international statistics prove very poignantly that the educational model we've been using for a lot of years just doesn't work in a lot of cases. And so when you walk into an IB classroom, it should look like a classroom that you've seen before, but it's a classroom of a really good teacher. It's a classroom of a really good lesson. And so it's a framework. It's not different than a lot of other things in a lot of ways, and we will explore this. The middle years program is really just a systematic approach to purposeful planning, reflection, and implementation of what we know are good teaching practices. It's more about what we as teachers are creating, um, and recreating and doing, than it is about what students are doing. So there's not that as the emphasis so much. And so the idea is that that IB helps all teachers be good. They embrace the philosophy that teaching is not a gift, it's a skill, and a skill can be developed. So you can take a teacher who's not great or subpar or just average, or any number of adjectives there that are not highly complimentary, and through purposeful planning, through purposeful implementation, and purposeful reflection for next time's planning and implementation, that you can work with that person to give kids the best possible teacher that person that adult can be. And so every kid, we know every kid deserves to have great teachers. This is a system to help develop those people into great teachers. And I know some of us are starting out there. Some of us need some work. I happen to need some work. And so but it's really about that constant improvement, recognizing that no matter how good we are, we can always get better. Our kids demand that of us, and we owe it to them. And so middle years is really about that. And what that does, if we're doing it correctly, it increases access and equity for those kids. Um, and then in the I think it was about 2013, IB recognized yet another need, in that we finally agreed, at least in the United States, that not every kid needs to go to college. That doesn't need to be the message. In fact, a lot of kids could move into a trade directly out of high school and be very effective and very successful financially, personally, and professionally. But what we need to do is we need to grow them as professionals. And so they're going to need a lot of the same communication and critical thinking and problem solving skills. And so IB created what's known as the career related program. And again, an 11th and 12th grade program. If you're familiar with career and tech ed, and that as a discipline within the United States system, that's really what we're talking about. It's a CTE, it's a career and tech ed, with the addition of some higher level classes, so that later learning can still continue, because once you start a profession, you're, an apprentice welder or something, there's often additional education that they will need to pursue, and we need them to have those skills so that they can progress within the career. And so it's about getting them a career rather than setting them up with a job. And so IB has these 4 different programs, ideally to meet the needs of all possible students. And that's the current state of affairs right now. And so as we move forward with this, I'll get into the nuts and bolts of each of those as best I can, and some of the details and nuance within each of those, as well as possibly some applications and pragmatic approach to doing all of this. Um, so with that, this one I'm going to end.